On the 14th of July 1958, a pivotal moment in Iraq's history unfolded. As the Hashemite dynasty was overthrown, it signalled the beginning of a new political order, ending with the rise of Saddam Hussein. In this video, we will examine the interplay of political ambition, military intervention and social unrest that will forever change the Iraqi nation. In 1955, the Bandung Conference was held in Indonesia by President Sukarno, and it called for a greater independence from the Western and Eastern blocs, and called for all former colonies, and those still under colonial possession, to forge themselves eventually as self-sufficient powers who can together unite to overthrow the shackles of communism and imperialism. Following the Second World War, Iraq experienced a huge surge in Arab nationalist sentiment, with a growing faction of its population calling for the complete severance of British imperial influence and other Western ties. This wave of nationalism was particularly galvanised after the Egyptian Revolution of 1952, which saw Colonel Gamal Abdel Nasser rise to power through an anti-Western, pro-Arab coup, and the sort of ascent inspired many across the Arab world, including in Iraq, where revolutionary fervour began to take root. The first significant test of Iraq's nationalist aspirations came from the Suez Crisis of 1956. Prime Minister Nouri al-Said found himself in a precarious position, torn between opposing the Zionist occupation of Egyptian territory and supporting the pro-British invasion of the Suez Canal zone. His government's stance, however, quickly became unpopular with the broader pan-Arab community, who saw al-Said's alignment with the Western interests as betrayal of Arab unity. In the midst of the geopolitical tensions, there was also a growing call for regional cooperation amongst the Middle Eastern nations, not necessarily for full Arab unity, but certainly a formation of a collective alliance centred around the Fertile Crescent. Post-World War II, Iraq's economy was in a dire situation. Plagued by rampant inflation and a crumbling standard of living for its citizens, Prime Minister Nouri al-Said faced constant conflict with Abdul Ilah of the Monarchy at the time, who had much power over economic policy, which led to stagnation amid widespread economic decay. Although Iraq was an oil-rich nation, al-Said had secured interest increasing royalties from the Iraq Petroleum Company, hoping to boost government revenues. However, much of the country's oil was funneled into foreign accounts rather than infrastructure projects, further straining Iraq's relationship with the West as foreign influence over the nation's affairs deepened. In 1948, following the Anglo-Iraq Treaty on January 15th, the British had withdrawn almost fully from Iraq, marking the end of their direct influence, but leaving a 25-year agreement for military training and equipment purchases. This treaty was deeply unpopular and sparked the Wabath Rebellion just a year later, which opposed any form of British influence. In 1955, Iraq, along with Iran and Turkey, signed the Baghdad Pact, a defensive alliance which was capitalist, anti-communist, and it was a strategic move by the West, and it's widely criticised across the Arab world. In 1958, after the creation of the United Arab Republic between Egypt and Syria, and later Yemen, Iraq's efforts to unite with Hashemite Jordan were met with skepticism and resistance, largely due to a growing distrust of Western influence in the region. As Iraq's intellectual class gained influence, it gave rise to movements like the Free Officer Corps, modelled off the Free Officers movement in Egypt, which had overthrown the monarchy just 6 years earlier. This group, led by nationalist figures such as Abdul al-Karim Qasim and Abdul Salam Arif, Mohammed Najib al-Rubi, posed a significant challenge to the government. During this period, the Kingdom of Yemen had joined the United Arab Republic, and Syria was backing a pro-Arab civil war campaign against the Lebanese president Camille Chamoun, furthermore isolating Iraq and Jordan. In response, al-Said provided aid to Chamoun's government in May and June of 1958, directly undermining the nationalist cause. Furthermore, he had sent units from the Royal Iraqi Army to support Jordan, a move that directly angered many of the top leaders of the military and was a catalyst that led to the coup d'etat. 1956, a Supreme Committee for the Free Officers were formed, consisting of key military officials within the Iraqi army. There was a unanimous agreement that the old regime must be overthrown. However, there was a lack of cohesion regarding what should follow the regime change. The general consensus was that the coup d'etat would evolve into a democracy similar to Egypt's. Subcommittees were then established to explore the feasibility of carrying out such a coup. The three officers were predominantly Arab and Sunni, and most members of the Supreme Committee were men in their 40s who had graduated from the Iraqi military academy in the late 1930s. Now, the coup began on the 14th of July and was primarily the work of two key individuals, Abdul Karim Qasim and Abdel Salam Arif, along with their subsequent advisors. The 20th Brigade was stationed at Jalulu underneath the command of Brigadier Ahmad Hakim Muhammad Ali. Abdul Salam Arif himself was given orders to march on the night of the 13th to the 14th of July. This division was to proceed along the Fallujah-Ramadi highway, collecting ammunition at the Aru Garibin outside just Baghdad. The Baghdad garrison and palace guards, police force, were not informed of the planned plot. Meanwhile, Qasim was in charge of the 19th Brigade. The 19th Brigade was tasked with covering and countering any potential threats to the coup, while the 20th Brigade was to advance towards Baghdad. Arif successfully neutralised any opposition within the brigade with the cooperation of Colonel al-Daraji. The brigade was directed to march directly into the city within a few hours, and the 1st Battalion had seized control of the eastern portion of the Tigris, while 3 officers within the city's garrison had taken control of the Ministry of Defence, General Staff Compound, and General Post Office. Al-Rashid, the camp on the outskirts of the city, was also captured, with Lieutenant General Rafiq Arif being arrested. By this point, conspirators had secured their initial targets, but the key target still lay on the western side of the Tigris. This coup, following a classic execution with the key strategic buildings being captured during the early hours of the 14th, and Arif occupying the National Broadcasting Centre as his main headquarters, it was known to the conspirators that the monarch, crown prince and the prime minister would not be sleeping at their usual residence that night, as they were intending to leave for Turkey the next day on the Baghdad Pact business. Primary targets were Nouri al-Said's residence on the Tigris riverside, the required quarters of the police force, the army camp on the outskirts of Baghdad, key military learning institutions, and the Baghdad airport. One detachment of the 3rd Battalion was sent to seize the Ar-Rahib Palace. There was a period of a firefight between the detachment and the Royal Guards, with the Crown Prince showing signs of complete defeatism before the tide had fully turned against him. Had the crack Royal Guard resisted, the revolt might have been put down there and then, but the Crown Prince, partly because of a failure of will, and partly to save his own life and that of the King, ordered no resistance, and after a brief bombardment, the Royal Guards at the palace surrendered. This effectively sealed the fate of the Iraqi monarchy. At about 8 AM, when King Faisal II, Crown Prince Abdullah, and a number of female members of the royal family emerged from the building, a young captain, who was not a member of the Free Officers group, opened fire. Others joined in, and in brief confusion of shots, within minutes, they had all been shot dead in the palace courtyard. What exactly happened is not quite clear. There wasn't any direct orders to kill the monarchy, but it simply happened. Now, Nouri al-Said did manage to escape his compound after hearing gunshots from the royal palace and escape with a motorcade. This was something in the thorn in the side of the potential success of the coup, although he was eventually captured next day and shot dead in the street. In the early hours of the 14th of July, the citizens of Iraq woke with stirring strains of martial music and the resounding nationalist anthem Allahu Akbar, broadcast over the radio. At 6:30 AM, Arif, standing before the nation, solemnly read aloud the proclamation and announcing the coup had just unfolded. The proclamation was as follows: Noble people of Iraq, trusting God and with the aid of loyal sons of the people and the National Armed Forces, we have undertaken to liberate our beloved homeland from the corrupt crew that imperialism installed. We have taken an oath to sacrifice our blood and everything we hold dear for you. For your sake, rest assured that we will continue to work on your behalf. Power shall soon be entrusted to a government emanating from you and inspired by you. This can only be realised by the creation of a People's Republic, which will uphold complete Iraqi unity, tie itself in the bonds of fraternity with the Arab and Muslim states, act in keeping with the principles of the UN and the resolutions of the Bandung Conference, and honour all pledges and treaties in conforming with the interests of the homeland. Accordingly, the national government shall henceforth be called the Republic of Iraq. Within hours, the streets were teeming with citizens, some exultant at the fall of the old regime, while others seemed seething with anger and revulsion at what the revolution had done. The three officers, evidently ill-prepared to handle the discontent stirred by their actions, swiftly imposed a curfew and militarised the police force in a bid to restore order amongst ensuing chaos. This heavy-handed response not only inflicted considerable damage upon Iraq's unity, but it also damaged its international standing. Outside major urban centres, however, the country's capture proceeded largely without significant disturbance. Qasim, in a calculated move, commanded the 19th Brigade to arrest the commander of the 3rd Division, Major General al-Dagestani. By noon on the 14th of July, Abdul Karim Qasim arrived in Baghdad with his forces and, of notable significance, established his headquarters at the Ministry of Defence. His delayed arrival fueled suspicions that he'd been waiting to gauge the success of the coup before committing to action. Meanwhile, although Iraq's neighbouring allies were poised to intervene, their plans were thwarted largely due to diplomatic pressure from the British. The United States had sent some Marines to nearby countries in case there was a full-scale invasion. When a country effectively under the influence and control of a foreign power undergoes a dramatic collapse and complete shift in its political regime, it's bound to raise some eyebrows, if not suspicions. This was certainly the case in Iraq, where the sudden overthrow of the monarchy in 1958 shocked many, particularly in the West. The Americans in particular were caught by surprise, as there was a widespread belief that the Egyptian leader Gamal Abdel Nasser had played a role in facilitating the removal of the Iraqi monarchy. There was also a profound fear that this event could trigger a ripple effect across Middle Eastern nations, potentially sparking unrest in neighbouring countries such as Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey and Iran. With Iraq now declared a republic, the institutions that once supported the monarchy were swiftly dismantled, including the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate. This dramatic shift had far-reaching consequences for the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. Iraq, which had once been seen as a crucial part of the West's strategy to contain Soviet influence in the region, was now under the control of a regime that was not aligned with the West, and wasn't particularly opposed to the East either. This collapse of the pro-Western government significantly weakened the West's anti-communist strategy, creating a major gap in efforts to curb the Soviet expanse, at a time when tensions between the East and West were at their zenith. Abdul Karim Qasim was appointed Prime Minister of the newly declared Republic, and also taking on the role of Ministry of Defence, while Abdul Salam Arif was made Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of the Interior and Deputy Commander-in-Chief. Despite the promise of a new political order, the Republic had faced considerable instability. The country was governed by a small but largely ineffective council, and internal dissent was evident, notable with the 1958 Mosul uprisings by Arab nationalists. Moreover, Iraq was deeply divided over whether to join Nasser's United Arab Republic, which had become a contentious political issue. The coup had left Iraq in a state of uncertainty. In 1959, Iraq had withdrawn from the Baghdad Pact, signalling a shift in foreign policy as it sought closer relations with the left-leaning anti-Western regimes, which primarily in the Middle East, but also with the Soviet Union, less so with China. The country would continue to experience political instability, with several coups occurring over the next several decades. In February 1963, Qasim was overthrown in a coup and he was killed, following another in November of the same year. In 1968, the Ba'ath Party under Saddam Hussein's eventual leadership would seize power, ushering in a new era of authoritarian rule. This period of turmoil continued until the US-led intervention in the Gulf War and eventual war in Iraq in 1991. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video as much as I enjoyed doing it. I haven't really covered Middle Eastern history on this channel before, but I think I'm going to get into it. I enjoy learning about Iraq history, actually, with the regime of Saddam Hussein. I enjoy learning about Middle Eastern dictatorships. I recently expanded into Turkey. I'm somewhat decent at speaking the Turkish language, so I think I'm going to move this towards the Middle East for the next couple of videos, see how they do, and then we'll gauge it from there. But I'm glad you have stuck around till the end, and it means the world to me that people are watching to this point. But thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.